cause of death was listed as a single gunshot wound to the chest. The medical examiner disagreed, emphasizing that while the presence of a fatal gunshot injury was clear, there were additional forensic details suggesting further investigation. Upon examination of the deceased's hands and clothing, significant amounts of gunpowder residue were found. This evidence was consistent with the hypothesis that the firearm used had been discharged near the deceased. It was also consistent with another interpretation. The residue matched exactly to a specific firearm recovered from the scene, establishing a direct link between the weapon and the injury sustained by the deceased. The central finding of this analysis was that the gunpowder residue found on the deceased matches the firearm in question, providing definitive evidence linking the two. Chapter: Case Background. The incident under investigation occurred on March 15th at a residential property located in the suburban area of Millbrook, New Hampshire. At approximately 9:47 a.m., a neighbor reported hearing multiple loud noises consistent with gunfire emanating from the residence. Upon arrival, local law enforcement officers found the front door ajar and observed what appeared to be damage consistent with bullet impacts on both the exterior wall and interior furnishings near the entryway. Initial reports indicated that the deceased was discovered lying in a prone position approximately 5 feet inside the doorway, wearing clothing stained with blood. A single firearm, a Smith & Wesson M&P .40 caliber pistol, was found adjacent to the body's right hand. The scene suggested an intruder confrontation had occurred near the entry point before fatal shots were fired. Local law enforcement secured the premises and initiated a thorough crime scene investigation, including collection of evidence such as bullet casings and suspected bullet fragments from the immediate vicinity. The presence of the firearm alongside the deceased raised questions regarding its role in the incident. Initial hypotheses centered on the possibility of self-inflicted injury or an act of violence by another party. Further analysis would be required to clarify these assumptions. Chapter: Initial findings upon arrival at the scene. First responders noted a single individual, subsequently referred to as the deceased, located in a seated position on a wooden chair within an enclosed residential space. The room was moderately lit and showed no signs of forced entry or significant disturbance beyond the immediate vicinity of the body. Initial medical assessment revealed a singular entrance wound, consistent with a gunshot injury located in the upper chest region without any visible exit wounds. No other injuries were apparent to the naked eye, suggesting a single-shot mechanism likely resulting from close-range fire due to the presence of soot and stippling patterns around the entry site. The initial manner of death was classified as homicide based on the environmental context and nature of the injury. The absence of defensive wounds further supported this conclusion. Notably, the firearm was recovered near the body, establishing a clear association between the weapon and the wound pattern observed. This convergence of evidence prompted the immediate collection of samples for bullet residue analysis to corroborate the relationship between the deceased's gunshot residue patterns and the discovered firearm. Chapter: Forensic investigation. At the scene, swabs were collected from both hands of the deceased for subsequent examination of gunshot residue, GSR. Additionally, several cartridge casings and a suspect firearm were secured in accordance with standard protocols. A detailed chain of custody was meticulously documented to ensure evidence integrity throughout handling and analysis phases. Notably, the recovered firearm displayed distinct striations that corresponded with tool marks found on bullet jackets extracted from the deceased's body cavity. Absent from the scene, however, were any spent primers or live ammunition, suggesting a potential attempt at concealment by the perpetrator. The presence of GSR on the hands of the deceased corroborated the use of the firearm in question, providing critical linkage evidence between weapon and victim. Bullet residue analysis was conducted on swab samples collected from the hands and clothing of the deceased. The primary objective was to detect metallic elements indicative of discharged ammunition, including antimony, barium, and lead. inductively coupled plasma mass spectrometry, IPMS, and scanning electron microscopy with energy dispersive X-ray spectroscopy, SEMEDS, were employed for elemental identification. Detection thresholds were set at parts per billion levels to ensure specificity and sensitivity. Histological sections of the tissue samples, including skin abrasions, revealed particulate matter consistent with gunshot residue. Microscopic examination confirmed the presence of lead flakes and antimony grains in a 1:4 ratio, characteristic of primer composition from smokeless powder cartridges. Quantitative analysis indicated lead concentrations ranging between 0.5 to 2.0 Ng/μL, with barium at approximately 0.2 Ng/μL and antimony at 1.8 Ng/μL in the samples closest to the discharge site. These findings corroborate the hypothesis that the firearm involved was a semi-automatic pistol using standard ammunition. The analysis of bullet residue on the deceased's hands provided critical temporal context for reconstructing the sequence of events leading to fatal discharge. Residue patterns indicated direct contact with a firearm immediately preceding death, corroborated by matching striations from the weapon at the crime scene. This evidence firmly established that the firearm was handled and discharged in close proximity to the time of death. The postmortem interval was estimated using entomological specimens collected during autopsy, indicating decomposition had not progressed beyond early stages consistent with a lethal event occurring within hours prior. The timeline confirmed the deceased's presence at the scene, but contradicted initial reports suggesting prolonged interaction or struggle, instead supporting a scenario of sudden and isolated discharge. In the context of this case involving a gunshot wound to the deceased, analysis of bullet residue collected from the hands and clothing provided critical information regarding the discharge of firearms at the scene. The presence of gunpowder residue, specifically barium and antimony particles in characteristic patterns consistent with short-range firing distances, was identified through spectrographic testing. These residues matched compositionally with firearm samples recovered nearby, indicating a direct association between the weapon and the injury sustained by the deceased. This evidence is conclusive, leaving minimal room for alternative explanations regarding the origin of the gunshot residue. In expert testimony, this analysis would confirm that the firearm in question was likely used to discharge the bullet that caused fatal injuries to the deceased, based on forensic findings and comparative analysis of residue samples. Chapter Resolution: The examination of bullet residue collected from the deceased revealed a definitive match to the firearm recovered at the scene. This conclusion stemmed from meticulous analysis utilizing scanning electron microscopy, combined with energy dispersive X-ray spectroscopy, which identified elemental composition consistent with both the residues found on the hands and clothing of the deceased and those extracted from the barrel and slide of the weapon. Chapter Resolution: The examination of bullet residue collected from the deceased revealed a definitive match to the firearm recovered at the scene. Initially, there was uncertainty regarding whether the residue detected on the deceased's skin and garments originated from handling the firearm or direct discharge. However, subsequent testing confirmed that the pattern and distribution of particles were indicative of recent firing rather than mere contact with a gun. This finding solidified the link between the recovered firearm and the shooting incident, thereby resolving ambiguities present in earlier stages of the investigation. The confirmation provided critical evidence supporting the hypothesis that the firearm was directly involved in the discharge that resulted in fatal injury to the deceased. Bullet residue analysis confirms the presence of firearm discharge particles matching those consistent with the weapon found in proximity to the deceased. This case underscores the critical role of meticulous sampling and comparative analysis in establishing a definitive link between evidence and the scene of an incident, reinforcing stringent evidentiary standards. The file remains open.